John Eats Cheap doing a much anticipated, long time requested recipe tonight. Mrs. Cheap's Amazeballs. Thanks to JoJo, who puts a bug on our ear every week and says, what about Mrs. Cheap's Amazeballs? Because we've done some stuff with the Amazeballs meatballs, but gotten them out of the freezer because when we make them, we make a lot of them. And so we're going to make them tonight. We're going to show you how to make them. Mrs. Cheap, I don't know, she found this recipe, modified it a little. It's a pound. I have a little over a pound of Italian sausage, a pound of ground beef. We've got bread, 3 slices of bread, mozzarella cheese, garlic, Italian seasoning, Parmesan cheese. And to start it off, this is, instead of using breadcrumbs, you use the sliced bread and just pour about a quarter to half a cup of milk in there. Enough to soak this bread, kind of like that, and let it soak up all that milk. All that bread is going to soak up that milk. That's.
Oh, we need an egg too.
That's. Oh, do we?
Yes.
To go in with this?
No, not in there.
Oh, okay.
But I just remembered.
Okay. We have eggs. That's a good thing.
I know we do.
All right. So I'm just going to let this bread soak up that milk. So who remembers this from the 70s and 80s? The incredible edible egg. All right, so let's get started. We're going to go into the mixer. I don't do this by hand, or Mrs. Cheap doesn't do this by hand. Italian sausage is in. That's some great Grazianos from here in central Iowa. A pound of ground beef. All right, so the meat is in. I'm going to season it with some salt, some freshly cracked black pepper, some Italian seasoning from the Italian grocery, 120-year tradition. This is just all the good Italian spices.
It smells like the store.
I know. And we'll be updating this. We'll show you a cool trick on how to make sure your spices are right. We got to go in with a little fresh garlic.
I prefer the jarred garlic in this to fresh garlic because it's just a little softer. I think it cooks down better.
That could be. You could use garlic powder too if you want.
Yeah.
Some Parmesan, freshly grated. I got no measurements on these. I'm sorry.
No, it's kind of like meatloaf. I mean, it does the same.
1 egg. Ooh. And our milk-soaked bread. It's going in there. Now we're just going to mix this up. We're not going to do it by hand. We're using the KitchenAid. It's easier and just the way to do this. Lock it down and put it on 1. So there we are, a couple minutes of mixing with the paddle. It looks pretty well mixed, and it already smells Amazeballs like. Smells really good. So it's all mixed up. Now we test it. Just take a little piece like this. Throw that in the microwave for 20 to 30 seconds. Okay, so that went 25 seconds. Just a little mini meatball. We're just testing for seasoning. We want to make sure it's seasoned correctly because I don't use exact measurements.
And you don't want to eat raw meat.
No. That is pretty good. I may go with a little more Italian. Mrs. Cheap, you tell me. These are your Amazeballs. Maybe a little more salt too.
More salt and yeah.
All right. So more salt.
And you got to remember, this is a couple pounds of meat, so that's a.
It is. It's 2 1/3. The sausage was like 1 1/3 pounds. So more there.
But you can do that. Your sister showed me that to test it.
The trick to test it, yeah, we do it with meatloaf, everything. Because we don't use exact amounts. We just kind of throw some in, and it's a great way to test it. So now we need to mix this up. All right, so we tested after the seasoning and it was perfect. It's kind of funny that it's always the second tasting. After one, we say it needs a little of this, a little of this, and then it's perfect the next time. Mrs. Cheap's got the, I don't even know what size this is. Not big enough for an ice cream cone, but big enough for an Amazeball, just to try and get them all the same size. We're just going to go ahead and put these on parchment.
Then we'll show you how we make them Amazeballs.
Yeah, get them all measured out, and then the magic happens. All right, so now Mrs. Cheap usually uses fresh mozzarella, which we can get at Graziano's, the Italian grocery. And she does like the small balls, right?
Yeah, the little tiny snack
They call them
balls.
petals or something.
Yeah.
We're going to use just regular diced up mozzarella. So we have the meatballs here. You just stick it in the middle and form the ball around it, just like that. Seal it up and back down. This is what makes them Amazeballs. And yeah, when we cook them, some of this cheese will melt out, but what's wrong with melted out cheese?
And these are big ones. I've made them smaller. I've made them bigger.
These are really good sized.
These are perfect for meatball subs.
Meatball subs, or to throw on some spaghetti, or just in a crock pot with a jar of ragu, garlic, herb, something else sauce.
It's a great appetizer. I mean, these go well at potluck.
Oh, and they will be the first thing eaten. There we go, 2 dozen Amazeballs going into the 375 oven until they're done and starting to leak a little bit of cheese. So there they are. See, most of them leaked. A few didn't. Mrs. Cheap probably did those, so they didn't leak, sealed them up. But the leakage is fine. You just wrap it around the ball. We're going to let these cool down a little bit. We're going to have some for dinner tonight. We're going to do meatball hoagies. And the rest, we are going to let them really cool down. We'll get them in the freezer and individually freeze them. These are really big, too. They look really big. But we'll individually freeze them and then do them in the food saver and seal them up for future meals, kind of like JoJo saw us use and said, what's the recipe for those Amazeballs?
So finally, you can stop begging our friend JoJo. You can...
There you are. That's how we make them, just like that. This makes a great meatloaf. This exact recipe makes a great meatloaf, too. Italian meatloaf. Check it out with John H. Cheap.